Imagine sitting at your own birthday party with a giant cake in front of you and not a single guest shows up. That's exactly what happened to a young girl in a wheelchair until a stranger, a black single dad, walked over and said 4 words that changed her life forever. Can we join you? What happened next will restore your faith in people. The candles flickered softly, each little flame dancing like it was trying to cheer her up. The cake itself was beautiful. Layers of moist vanilla sponge, covered in thick, fluffy pink frosting, with tiny white sugar flowers placed perfectly around the edges. In the center, "Happy 10th Birthday, Emily," was written in shiny gold icing that sparkled under the light. But the beauty of the cake only made the scene sadder. Emily sat at the head of the long table, her small hands resting neatly on her lap. Her wheelchair, with its soft pink cushions, was positioned so she could see everything. The table full of party hats, the unopened gift bags, and the colorful balloons that floated lazily above. Everything was ready for a celebration, except there were no guests to celebrate with. The restaurant was one of the finest in the city. Polished wooden floors, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, waiters dressed in black vests and crisp white shirts. It had been her father's idea to rent the whole place out for her birthday. Money was never a problem for him. He was Richard Lawson, a man who had built his tech company from the ground up and turned it into a billion-dollar empire. When he planned something, it was always big, grand, and flawless. At least that was the plan. The invitations had gone out weeks ago, printed on expensive cardstock with gold lettering, sent to all the kids in Emily's school. Richard had even included little notes for the parents, letting them know everything would be taken care of: food, entertainment, even chauffeur service if needed. No one could say it wasn't convenient. And yet, here they were. Emily looked at the empty chairs, her eyes scanning the table as if maybe, just maybe, someone would appear late, rushing in with an apology and a smile. But with each passing minute, the hope faded. She heard muffled voices near the entrance, and her heart leapt, only to realize it was just the restaurant staff talking. The candles on her cake were still burning, but their once tall flames were shrinking. She could hear the faint hiss of wax dripping down the sides. Her father stood a few steps away, pretending to check his phone. He had the kind of expression that adults wear when they're trying to hide their feelings. Brows furrowed just enough to show frustration, lips pressed together to keep from sighing. Richard was used to solving problems. He could negotiate with investors, outsmart competitors, and win deals that others thought impossible. But right now, he felt powerless. He knew why no one had come. It wasn't the invitations. It wasn't the venue. It wasn't the food. It was Emily's wheelchair. Emily had been in it since she was 5, after a rare illness had left her paralyzed from the waist down. She never let it stop her from dreaming, from laughing, or from being the brightest girl in the room. But other kids didn't always see that. Some were shy around her. Others just didn't know what to say. A few even made cruel jokes at school, which she pretended not to hear. And while their parents might have used polite excuses, "We're busy that day, we'll be out of town," Richard knew the truth. Emily glanced at him. Her eyes, big, brown, full of questions, seemed to ask, did they forget? Richard smiled gently, even though inside his chest felt tight. "Maybe they're just running late," he said. His voice was calm, but his heart was breaking. Emily forced a small smile, the kind children give when they don't want their parents to worry. She looked back at her cake, watching the flames sway. She didn't make a wish. She didn't blow them out. She just sat there, silent, waiting. The waiters shifted uncomfortably in the background. One of them whispered to another, glancing toward the door. Even they could feel how heavy the air had become. A celebration without laughter was like a song with no music, just an empty rhythm. Richard considered ending it early. He could tell the staff to pack up the cake, take the decorations down, and head home. They could celebrate later, just the two of them, in their big house overlooking the city. But he also knew that would only make the memory of this day worse. He wanted to give his daughter something different, even if it wasn't the perfect party he had planned. But how? He walked toward her, about to suggest they cut the cake anyway, when Emily's voice stopped him. "Do you think maybe nobody wanted to come because of me?" she asked quietly, her eyes still on the cake. Richard froze. The question hit him like a punch. He crouched down so he was level with her and shook his head. "Emily, Don't ever think that. You are the most amazing person I know. If people can't see that, it's their loss, not yours. Emily gave a small nod, but Richard knew she wasn't fully convinced. Words were nice, but they didn't fill empty chairs. Just then, the restaurant door opened. Richard turned his head, expected to see another waiter. But instead, in walked someone completely unexpected. A tall man in a worn denim jacket, with a warm but cautious smile, stepped inside. Beside him was a boy about Emily's age, holding a small package wrapped in old newspaper. They paused for a moment, looking around as if unsure if they were intruding. And then the man's voice rang out, a voice that would change the rest of the day, and maybe even their lives. "Can we join you?" The day of Emily's next birthday arrived, and for the first time in years, Richard didn't feel that familiar ache in his chest when he woke up. The estate was decorated simply but beautifully. Fairy lights strung across the garden, a long table set with colorful plates, and flowers Emily had chosen herself. There was no grand guest list this time, just the people who truly mattered. David and Marcus arrived early, Marcus holding a small box wrapped in bright paper. "Happy birthday," he shouted as soon as he saw Emily. Emily grinned from ear to ear. "You're early." "Couldn't wait," Marcus replied, handing her the box. Inside was a handmade friendship bracelet, the bead spelling out E and M. "It's perfect," Emily whispered, fastening it to her wrist. The afternoon passed in laughter and games. Richard noticed something amazing. Emily didn't look over at him every few minutes to see if he was watching. She was too busy living in the moment, too busy enjoying herself. When it came time for cake, Richard stood behind his daughter as everyone gathered around. The candles flickered in the late afternoon breeze. "Make a wish, sweetheart," he said softly. Emily closed her eyes, her face calm but full of quiet joy. Then she blew out the candles, and Richard knew whatever she'd wished for, she didn't need it anymore. She already had it. After the cake, the kids headed off to the art room to paint together. Richard and David lingered on the patio, sipping coffee. "You know," Richard said, "last year, her birthday ended in tears. This year, well, look at her." David smiled. "That's what friendship does. It doesn't just fill your time. It fills your heart." Richard nodded slowly. "And to think, all of this started with me calling security on you at an airport." They both laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laugh that only comes when you've been through something together. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Emily was asleep, Richard scrolled through the photos he'd taken. One caught his attention. Emily and Marcus, their heads bent close together, both holding paintbrushes mid-laugh. It wasn't staged, it wasn't polished, but it was real. He saved it as his phone's wallpaper. Because this wasn't just a picture of his daughter's birthday. It was a picture of a new chapter. One filled with friendship, laughter, and the promise that neither would face life alone again. And so, what began as a tense misunderstanding at an airport became something none of them expected. A friendship that changed lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we think are strangers can end up becoming family. Because in the end, kindness doesn't just bridge differences, it builds something unshakable. The very next afternoon, Richard found himself dialing David's number. Something you wouldn't normally do so quickly after meeting someone new. But there was something about yesterday that kept replaying in his mind. Emily's laughter, the way she and Marcus seemed to forget the world for a while, the feeling of genuine connection that had been missing for far too long. When David picked up, his voice was light. "Hey, Richard, I was just about to call you." That surprised Richard. "Really?" "Yeah," David said with a chuckle. "Marcus hasn't stopped talking about Emily since yesterday. He even asked if we could invite her to the park this weekend." Richard paused, his instinctive response being to say no. The park was tricky, uneven ground, kids running everywhere. He'd always avoided those places for Emily because her wheelchair made navigating difficult. But then, he remembered her smile when Marcus had pushed her to the dessert counter. "Actually," Richard said slowly, "how about we do one better? Why don't you both come over this afternoon? I'll have the chef make something simple, and the kids can hang out here. We got a garden with a smooth path, easy for Emily's chair." David didn't hesitate. "Sounds perfect." We'll be there. That afternoon, the grand garden of Richard's estate felt different. It wasn't the manicured lawn or the expensive patio furniture that stood out. It was the sound of children's voices, weaving through the air like music. Marcus was showing Emily how to play a game on his tablet. She was laughing so hard she could barely speak, occasionally swatting at him playfully when he teased her about losing. David sat beside them on the patio steps, sipping lemonade. Richard stayed a few feet back, leaning against a railing, just watching. It hit him then. He'd hosted hundreds of events, fundraisers, and corporate dinners in this garden, but none of them had felt this alive. At one point, Emily looked over at her father. "Dad, can Marcus see my art room?" Richard blinked. "Of course, sweetheart." She led Marcus, or rather, Marcus wheeled her, into the bright, sunlit room at the back of the house. Canvases lined the walls, filled with bold colors and sweeping brushstrokes. "You painted all these?" Marcus asked, eyes wide. Emily nodded shyly. "Yeah, when I couldn't walk anymore, I started painting. It's like my way of going places without moving." "That's awesome," Marcus said sincerely. "You're way better at this than I am at anything." Emily grinned. "Bet you're better at running." "True," Marcus said, laughing. "But you're better at making something beautiful out of nothing. That's cooler." Richard, standing quietly in the doorway, felt his chest tighten. It wasn't pity Marcus was giving her. It was admiration, something Emily hadn't heard from a peer in years. Over the next few weeks, the visits became regular. Sometimes they'd meet at David's small but cozy home. Marcus would proudly show Emily the little vegetable garden he and his dad tended. Other times, David and Marcus would join Richard and Emily for dinners at the estate, followed by board games or movie nights. Richard noticed a change in his daughter almost immediately. She spoke more. She laughed louder. She even started talking about things she wanted to do, like trying adaptive sports or joining an online art community. One evening, after David and Marcus had gone home, Richard tucked Emily into bed. "Did you have fun today?" he asked softly. She smiled, eyes already drooping. "Yeah, I like having a friend." Her words were simple, but to Richard, they felt monumental. One Saturday, Richard offered to take both kids to an indoor recreation center that had wheelchair-friendly activities. Marcus and Emily played adaptive basketball, zipped through a mini obstacle course, and even tried painting side by side on giant easels. David stood next to Richard, both men watching as the kids competed over who could finish a painting fastest. "She's different," David said quietly. Richard glanced at him. "Emily?" David nodded. "Yeah, happier, brighter. I think she just needed someone her own age who wasn't afraid to treat her like any other kid." Richard felt a wave of gratitude. "That someone was your son." David smiled faintly. "And I think Marcus needed Emily too. He doesn't talk much about his mom leaving, but he's carried that with him. She's giving him a reason to focus on something good." One evening, after dropping Marcus off, David lingered by his car. "Richard," he began, "I don't know how this works, but I think we've both been given something we didn't know we needed." Richard looked him in the eye. "Yeah, I think so too." There was no grand declaration, no big moment. Just two fathers who had found in each other an unexpected ally in raising their children. By now, the once empty birthday cake photo had been replaced on Richard's phone by dozens of new ones. Emily and Marcus painting, laughing, eating ice cream, rolling down the garden path together. Each one was a reminder that sometimes the best gifts came from the most unexpected meetings. The restaurant was quieter now. Most of the lunchtime crowd had gone, and the soft clinking of dishes in the kitchen was the only background noise. Emily and Marcus had wandered over to the dessert counter with a waiter, pointing at the little pastries and debating which looked best. That left Richard and David sitting across from each other at the now mostly empty table. For a few seconds, they didn't say anything. Richard was never one for small talk, and David didn't seem the type to force conversation. But then David broke the silence. "You've got a great kid," he said simply. Richard's lips curved into a small, proud smile. "Thank you. She's my whole world." David nodded. "I can tell. Marcus is the same for me." He paused for a beat, then added, "It's not easy raising a kid on your own." Richard looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Single dad, too?" David leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "Yeah, Marcus's mom left when he was 3. It's been just us ever since. I'm not gonna lie, it's been rough. There were nights when I didn't know if we'd have dinner, mornings when I didn't know how I'd pay for the next bill. But we made it." Something in David's tone struck Richard. This man wasn't complaining, just telling his truth, the kind of truth most people kept hidden. Richard sighed, his gaze falling to his hands. "I wish I could say I understand completely, but my struggles are different. I've always been able to give Emily everything. The best doctors, the best tutors, the best of everything money can buy. But lately," he trailed off, searching for the right words. "Lately, I've realized that none of that matters if she's lonely." David leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Richard's. "I get that. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy someone to sit across the table from you and really see you. That's something else." Richard swallowed hard. "I planned this huge birthday party for her. I invited everyone from her school, their parents, all my business contacts. I thought if I made it grand enough, she'd feel loved. But one by one, people canceled. Some didn't even bother to respond. And today, I almost canceled the whole thing." David tilted his head. "But you didn't." "No," Richard said quietly. "And I'm glad I didn't, because if I had, I wouldn't have met you and your son." For a moment, they both just sat there, letting the weight of that truth sink in. David broke the pause with a small chuckle. "You know, when we walked in and saw that giant cake and empty chairs, Marcus leaned over to me and whispered, 'Dad, that girl looks like she needs us.'" Richard blinked, a little taken aback. "He said that?" David nodded. "Yeah, he's got a big heart, sometimes bigger than mine. He knows what it's like to feel left out." That sentence landed heavier than David probably intended. Richard realized he didn't actually know the last time Emily had a real friend. Between her paralysis and the way other kids treated her differently, she spent most days surrounded by adults. Richard's voice was softer when he spoke again. "Do you think Marcus might want to come over sometime, just to hang out with her?" David smiled warmly. "I think he'd love that. And not just for Emily's sake. Marcus could use a friend, too." There was a simple, unspoken agreement that felt like the beginning of something meaningful. Before they could say more, laughter erupted from the dessert counter. Emily and Marcus came running. Well, Emily wheeling quickly, Marcus jogging alongside her, both carrying tiny plates with colorful macarons. "We picked the best ones," Emily announced proudly, holding out a bright pink one for her dad. Richard took it and smiled. "Looks amazing. Try it," Marcus urged. Richard bit into the macaron. Sweet, slightly tangy, perfect. "You were right." David shook his head, grinning. "I think you two are just trying to keep the sugar rush going all day." Emily shrugged, a playful spark in her eyes. "Maybe." The moment felt easy. And for Richard, easy moments didn't happen often anymore. He realized he wasn't thinking about the canceled guests, the missed expectations, or the embarrassment he'd felt earlier. He was thinking about how his daughter's cheeks were flushed from laughter, how she and Marcus seemed like they'd known each other for years, and how David, a complete stranger a few hours ago, felt like someone he'd trust. As they prepared to leave, Richard found himself saying something without even planning it. "We should do this again. Soon." David nodded. "Yeah, we should." The first bite of cake was always the best, especially when it was shared. Emily's fork cut into the soft pink frosting and fluffy vanilla sponge, and when she tasted it, her eyes lit up. "This is so good," she said, her words muffled by the sweetness in her mouth. Marcus took a bite of his own slice and nodded. "You're right. I think I'm going to have to eat at least 3 pieces for research purposes." Emily laughed, covering her mouth so she wouldn't spill crumbs. "For research?" "Yeah," Marcus said seriously. "I need to make sure it's consistently good quality." David chuckled from across the table. "Be careful, Marcus. If you keep eating like that, you might explode before we even get to the games." "Games?" Emily asked, her eyes perking up. Richard stepped forward, a little smile tugging at his lips. Well, we were supposed to have games, but since most of the guests didn't come, he trailed off, not want to dampen the moment. Marcus's eyes flicked to Emily. That's okay. We can make our own games. My dad and I are pros at that. Emily tilted her head. Like what? Marcus grinned mischievously. You'll see. He picked up a balloon from the table, one of the many that had been floating untouched for hours, and batted it into the air. Okay, he announced. New game. Don't let the balloon touch the ground. Emily giggled as he gently tossed it toward her. She reached up and hit it back toward him, her hands clumsy at first, but quickly finding a rhythm. The balloon floated slowly, giving her plenty of time to swat again. David even joined in, and soon Richard, despite himself, was laughing and taking a turn too. It wasn't the kind of party game Richard had envisioned when he'd booked the most expensive restaurant in the city, but it was working. The room filled with laughter and the soft thump of the balloon being hit back and forth. When the balloon finally touched the ground, Marcus threw his hands in the air. I win. No way, Emily protested. It hit the ground on your side. Marcus crossed his arms dramatically. We might need a rematch after more cake. David leaned in toward Emily. You better watch out. He's very competitive. Emily smirked. So am I. They dug into another round of cake, and this time Marcus insisted they both take turns try to feed each other small bites without dropping them. It turned into a hilarious mess. Frosting ended up on Marcus's nose, and Emily nearly spit out her cake from laughing too hard. Richard watched it all from just a few feet away. Each smile from his daughter felt like sunlight breaking through clouds that had been hanging over her for far too long. Then came the candles again. One of the waiters, clearly enjoying the change in energy, brought over a smaller piece of cake with a single candle in it. For a special second wish, he said with a wink. Emily stared at the little flame. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Richard could see her lips moving slightly, making a wish she wouldn't tell anyone. When she opened her eyes again, Marcus was watching her. What did you wish for? He asked. Emily grinned. If I tell you, it won't come true. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. I think I can guess. Oh, yeah. Yep, he said confidently. You wish for more cake. Emily burst out laughing again. No. They blew out the candle together, just like before, and Richard realized that this tiny act of blowing out a candle with someone by her side was probably more meaningful to Emily than anything else he could have planned. The rest of the afternoon blurred into moments that felt more like memories than just minutes passing. Marcus showing Emily another magic trick, this time a napkin. David telling a funny story about the time he and Marcus accidentally locked themselves out of their house. Emily sharing how she once convinced her dad to let her eat ice cream for breakfast on her birthday. It wasn't the party Richard had envisioned. In fact, on paper, it would look like a disaster. No invited guests, no planned games, just a handful of people at a table meant for many. But in reality, it was perfect. By the time the plates were cleared and the last bite of cake had been eaten, Emily looked happier than she had in weeks. She leaned back in her wheelchair, holding the little wooden butterfly keychain Marcus had given her. Her fingers traced its edges again and again, as if committing its shape to memory. David glanced at Richard, and the two men exchanged a silent nod, a wordless acknowledgement that something special had happened here today. And Richard thought to himself, this wasn't just birthday magic. This was the start of something much bigger. It was almost magical how quickly the mood changed once David and Marcus sat down. Only a few minutes ago, the table had felt like a frozen lake, cold, still, and uninviting. Now it was alive, like someone had lit a fire in the center and invited everyone to gather around it. Emily adjusted her party hat, the spark in her eyes growing brighter. Marcus, still wearing his own hat at a crooked angle, leaned closer to her. You know, he said in a mock-serious tone, birthday cake tastes 10 times better when you share it with someone who can do magic tricks. Emily tilted her head, intrigued. You can do magic tricks? Marcus grinned, pulling a coin from his pocket. Watch closely. He placed a coin in his left hand, closed his fingers, and gave a dramatic wave over it. Then he slowly opened his palm, and the coin was gone. Emily gasped, looking around for it. Where did it go? Marcus tapped her shoulder, and when she turned, she saw the coin dangling from behind her ear. Her laugh was sudden and real, the kind that makes your shoulders shake and your cheeks hurt. Richard, standing nearby, didn't say a word, but inside, he felt like he'd just witnessed a miracle. It wasn't the magic trick that amazed him. It was hearing his daughter laugh like that. David chuckled too. Careful, Marcus. If you keep pulling coins out of people's ears, we might have to start charging admission. Emily's grin widened. You could open a show right here. The conversation began to flow easily. Emily told Marcus about her favorite books, stories filled with castles, dragons, and brave heroes. Marcus, in turn, told her about the treehouse he and his dad had been building in their backyard. Dad says it's not finished yet, Marcus admitted, but I think it's already the coolest place on earth. Emily's eyes lit up. I've never been in a treehouse. Marcus looked at her for a moment, as if considering something important. Well, he said finally, maybe you should come visit ours when it's done. Emily's smile softened. I'd like that. Richard was watching all of this, his mind turning over what was happening. There was no awkwardness, no pity, no forced politeness. Marcus wasn't treating Emily like she was different. He was just talking to her, laughing with her, the way kids are supposed to. And Emily, for the first time in a long time, wasn't guarding herself. She was just being Emily. One of the waiters brought over the cake and set it in the middle of the table. The candles were replaced with fresh ones, tall and bright. The glow reflected in Emily's eyes as everyone leaned in. David clapped his hands once. All right, I think it's time for the official birthday song. The staff, sensing the shift in energy, joined in. David's deep, warm voice filled the room, blending with Marcus's enthusiastic singing. Even Richard, who wasn't much of a singer, added his voice to the mix. When the song ended, Emily took a deep breath. She leaned forward, ready to blow out the candles, but then paused. Her hands tightened on the arms of her wheelchair, and for a second, Richard thought she might pull back. Marcus leaned toward her. Hey, he whispered. Let's do it together. Emily glanced at him, then nodded. Side by side, they blew out the candles in one strong breath. The flames vanished, replaced by the smell of warm wax, and the table erupted in applause. It wasn't a roar of 100 guests. It wasn't the chaos of a room packed with children. But it was real, and for Emily, that was more than enough. Richard realized he was smiling. Not the polite CEO smile he used at business functions, but the kind that starts deep in the heart. The cake was sliced and passed around, and Emily insisted that Marcus get the first piece after her. Between bites, the kids traded stories about the most ridiculous things they'd ever done. Marcus once accidentally wore 2 different shoes to school, and Emily confessed that she once ate an entire bowl of jelly beans before breakfast. Every now and then, Richard caught David watching the two of them with the same quiet pride he felt himself. There was a calm in David's eyes, a steadiness that came from someone who knew the value of moments like this. The empty restaurant, once a reminder of disappointment, now felt like their own private celebration. The balloons still floated lazily. The decorations still hung in perfect arrangement, but they no longer felt wasted. They were part of this party now, the one that mattered, and somewhere deep down, Richard knew this wasn't just a lucky coincidence. People don't wander into your life like this for no reason. This was the beginning of something, though he didn't yet know what. What he did know was that the ice had been broken, and for the first time that day, Emily's birthday actually felt like a celebration. Richard stood frozen for half a second. Those 4 words, "Can we join you?" seemed almost out of place in the echo of the empty restaurant. But there was nothing pushy or awkward about the way they were spoken. The man's tone was warm, almost gentle, like someone offering a lifeline without making you feel like you needed saving. The tall stranger stepped further inside, guiding the boy beside him toward the table. The boy clutched a small package wrapped in old newspaper, the edges neatly folded, a single piece of string tied around it. It was the kind of gift that clearly wasn't bought last minute from a fancy store. It was personal. Up close, Richard could see the man better. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. His face carried the kind of lines that didn't just come from age, but from experience, the kind you get when life has thrown more than a few storms your way. And yet, there was a warmth to his expression that immediately eased some of the tension in the air. Richard found himself asking, "Do we know each other?" The man shook his head politely. "No, sir. My name's David. This is my son, Marcus. We were having lunch at the diner across the street, and..." He glanced at Emily, then back at Richard. "We noticed the cake." Emily, who had been quiet for most of the afternoon, lifted her eyes toward them. She didn't speak right away, partly from surprise, partly from curiosity. Kids have an instinct for sincerity, and right now, she was studying both father and son. Marcus smiled shyly and gave a small wave. "Hi." His voice was soft, but there was no hesitation in it. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Emily beat him to it. "You want to celebrate with me?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of hope and disbelief. Marcus took a small step closer. "Only if you'll let us." The way he said it, like it was entirely up to her, made Emily's heart warm a little. She looked at her father, as if asking for permission without actually saying the words. Richard hesitated for just a moment. Normally, he was careful about strangers, especially around his daughter. But something about David's presence told him this wasn't a random interruption. This was a choice, a moment that could either fade into nothing or change the entire day. He glanced down at Emily, saw the spark in her eyes, and nodded. "Of course," he said, his voice softening. "We'd be happy to have you join us." David's face lit up with gratitude. He motioned to Marcus, who pulled out a chair right next to Emily's spot at the head of the table. David himself took a seat across from her, but not before glancing at Richard, as if to silently say, "Thank you for trusting us." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The room, which had felt painfully large and empty just minutes ago, suddenly felt smaller in a good way. It was no longer just an echo chamber of clinking glasses and low murmurs from the staff. There was a new energy at the table now, something warm and alive. Marcus was the first to break the ice. He leaned toward Emily and asked, "So, how old are you today?" Emily smiled faintly. 10. "Nice," Marcus said, nodding seriously, as if 10 was a very important age, which to him it was. Double digits. That's a big deal. You get to boss people around now. Emily giggled, the sound surprising even her. Richard, standing off to the side, felt his chest loosen just a little at the sound. David joined in, leaning back in his chair. "Careful, Marcus. If she starts bossing us around, we'll all be in trouble." Emily laughed again, and the tension that had been sitting between her shoulders since the party started to melt away. She even reached for the colorful party hats on the table and handed one to Marcus. He took it, placed it on his head at a slightly crooked angle, and gave her a silly grin. "How do I look?" "Like you need more cake," she teased. Richard found himself smiling, genuinely this time. He watched his daughter talking, laughing, and for the first time in hours, not looking at the door to see who hadn't shown up. Instead, she was fully present, here with this boy she had just met, as though they'd known each other for years. The waiters, sensing the change in mood, began moving again, one bringing over extra plates, another refilling drinks. They were careful not to break the moment, but it was clear even they felt the atmosphere was no longer heavy. At one point, Marcus slid the little newspaper-wrapped package across the table toward Emily. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically, "but I made it myself." Emily carefully untied the string and unfolded the newspaper. Inside was a small wooden keychain, carved into the shape of a butterfly. The edges were a little uneven, the paint slightly smudged, but it was beautiful because it was real. "I love it," Emily said, and she meant it. She turned it over in her hands like it was the most valuable gift in the world. Richard swallowed hard. This wasn't the kind of moment you could buy with a credit card. This was kindness, plain and simple, given freely, without any expectation in return. And as he looked from David to Marcus to his daughter, he began to realize that this unexpected question, "Can we join you?" wasn't just a polite offer. It was the turning point of the day. It was the start of something neither he nor Emily could have planned for, but maybe something they both needed more than they knew. Richard Lawson wasn't the kind of man who got nervous in the corporate world. He was known as unshakable. Boardroom arguments, billion-dollar negotiations, aggressive takeovers. None of it rattled him. He had the kind of calm, confident presence that made people believe he could solve anything. But here, in this moment, he felt utterly powerless. He stood near the corner of the room, pretending to scroll through his phone. The screen glowed in his hand, but he wasn't really reading anything. His mind wasn't on business emails or stock prices. It was on the little girl sitting at the head of the table, staring at a cake that should have been surrounded by friends, not empty chairs. Every so often, he would glance up and watch her. She wasn't crying, but that almost made it worse. Richard had learned that there are two kinds of sadness in children, the kind that bursts out in tears and tantrums, and the kind that hides quietly deep inside where it's harder to reach. Emily had the second kind right now. He could see her small shoulders slump ever so slightly. She was trying to stay composed, maybe for him, maybe for herself, but he could tell the weight of the moment was pressing down on her. Richard took a deep breath and looked away, pretending to examine one of the balloon arrangements. But his heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about a birthday party. This was about every whispered comment he had overheard from other parents. Every time a child hesitated before approaching Emily at school. Every sorry, we can't make it, that came with a smile too forced to be real. Money couldn't fix this. He could buy her the most advanced wheelchair on the market, custom-built to fit her perfectly. He could hire the best tutors, pay for art classes, take her on trips to anywhere in the world. But he couldn't buy the one thing she wanted most, the kind of friendships that came naturally to other kids. The waiters kept glancing toward him, unsure what to do. One of them quietly asked if they should bring the cake over so Emily could at least blow out the candles. But Richard shook his head. Not yet, he said. He was holding on to a sliver of hope that maybe someone would walk in, even if they were late. Another 5 minutes passed. No one came. Richard felt a lump in his throat, the kind he hadn't felt since the day Emily was diagnosed. He remembered sitting in the hospital, the doctor explaining how a rare illness had damaged her spinal cord. He had sat there, holding his little girl's hand, promising her that she would still have an amazing life, that she could still do anything she dreamed of. He had believed it. He still did. But right now, watching her sit alone on her birthday, he wondered if he was failing her. He forced himself to stand tall, straightening his shoulders like he always did when facing a problem. But inside, he felt small. He thought about going over to her, cutting the cake together, making the best of it. They could laugh, take silly pictures, and pretend this was what they had planned all along. But Richard knew Emily was too smart for that. She would see through it. And then it happened. The sound of the restaurant door opening broke the heavy silence. Richard turned his head, expecting maybe a late guest. Instead, he saw a man he didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a worn denim jacket over a plain t-shirt. His skin was dark, his smile gentle but a little cautious, like someone who didn't want to intrude. Beside him was a boy about Emily's age, holding a small, oddly wrapped package, just newspaper and tape, nothing fancy. The man's eyes swept over the room, lingering on the empty chairs, the untouched cake, and finally on Emily. Richard noticed something in his gaze. Recognition? Like he understood exactly what was happening without anyone needing to explain. And then, in a voice that was warm but confident, the man spoke four simple words that Richard would never forget. "Can we join you?" The words hung in the air for a moment, and Richard almost didn't know how to respond. He blinked, as if making sure he'd heard right. The boy beside the man gave a small, hopeful smile. Richard's instinctive reaction, the one he had in business, was to analyze the situation. Who are they? Why are they here? But another part of him, the part that had been silently aching for the past hour, knew the answer didn't matter. He glanced at Emily. For the first time all afternoon, her eyes lit up just a little. And in that moment, Richard realized something. Sometimes, solutions don't come from planning or money or careful strategy. Sometimes, they walk into the door unexpectedly, wrapped in denim and carrying a gift in old newspaper.